My name is Ariana Cole, and the night everything snapped back into place, I was standing in my parents' driveway with a casserole dish I didn't even want to return. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickering like it was trying to warn me, and I could smell the burnt sweetness of something left too long in the oven inside their house. They were laughing there. Loud, loose, like the years they spent icing me out had never happened. And the irony is they only invited me because they thought I was broke again. They thought I needed them. They thought I'd come limping home with my tail between my legs. But here's the secret I didn't tell them, one I'm barely ready to tell you. Standing in that driveway, clutching that dish like a peace offering I didn't owe, I already knew I was the sole heir of my aunt's entire estate. The money, the properties, the land, the trust, all of it. And even before the lawyer said my name, I knew my life was about to break wide open. Still, I didn't tell a soul. I just stood there in the yellow light, letting them believe I was small, letting them talk to me like I was an inconvenience they were forced to love. Sometimes quiet is a weapon. Sometimes silence is the first step to freedom. And on that night I felt it, this trembling mix of shame and power running under my ribs. Like I was about to become someone they'd never see coming. I didn't expect the lawyer's office to smell like lemon polish and old carpet. I didn't expect the lights to buzz with that faint, electrical hum that always makes me feel like I'm inside a refrigerator. And I definitely didn't expect my aunt's handwriting, her looping, deliberate curves, to be the first thing I saw when Mr. Hutchins slid the folder across the desk toward me. He said my name like it weighed something. "Ms. Cole, before we begin, I need to prepare you." His voice was soft, too soft, like he was talking to someone fragile. I almost laughed. If only he knew how many times I had walked into a room like this, rooms where someone else's decisions determined whether I'd sink or swim. He had no idea I'd been training for this moment my whole life. I kept my hands folded in my lap, still, quiet. My aunt always said stillness is a kind of armor. "I'm ready," I told him. The clock on the wall clicked loudly 1 second at a time as he read through the legal phrases. My aunt's full name, the date of her passing, the line about no surviving spouse. My throat tightened at that. She'd been alone at the end, something I learned too late, something I still hadn't forgiven myself for. My breath fogged a faint patch on the cool glass table. I kept my eyes on that fog, watching it disappear, return, disappear again. And then he said the sentence that split my life cleanly in two. "She leaves her entire estate to you." The room didn't spin, my heart didn't leap. There was no cinematic swell of music or burst of relief. No, what I felt was quieter, stranger. Like someone had opened a door inside my chest and let warm air rush in. Like every slight I'd swallowed, every dismissal, every "you'll understand when you're older" finally had somewhere to go. But right behind that warmth was something else, a small, sharp pain under my ribs. Grief maybe, or guilt, or the memory of my mother saying, "Your aunt spoils you, you shouldn't rely on her so much." I'd believed her at the time. God, I'd believed everything. Mr. Hutchins kept talking, but the words blurred. Trusts, properties, land in Georgia I didn't know she still owned. A Victorian house I'd only visited once when I was 8. Stocks she'd invested in when she was younger than I am now. All mine. When he finally stopped, the silence felt thick enough to touch. I nodded slowly, afraid any sudden movement would break whatever spell the universe had cast over me. "I know this is a lot," he said. "It is," I admitted. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, calmer, older. "But I understand." He gave me a long, searching look, like he expected me to burst into tears. Or faint. Or reveal some dark secret about family dynamics he could file away under professional curiosity. But I just breathed in and out, steady as a metronome. Because the truth was, I already knew. Not the details, not the scale, but the shape of it. My aunt had hinted for years in her own subtle way, paying attention to my dreams when no one else did, slipping me books she thought would help me think strategically, reminding me that silence wasn't the same as weakness. That one day I'd need to remember everything. I'd just never imagined the remembering would hurt like this. Outside, the sky had darkened into that deep blue hour that always feels like a held breath. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the air tasted like oncoming rain. Streetlights flickered on with a soft click, spilling pale halos across the pavement. My reflection stared back at me from the lawyer's glass door, my face calm, too calm, like a lake holding a storm beneath the surface. I lifted a hand to the glass, touching the outline of my own cheek. I looked like the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who comes home for holidays even when her gut tells her to stay away. And tonight, I looked like a woman holding an inheritance too big to confess, too dangerous to reveal. A car rolled past slowly, headlights washing the sidewalk in white. I stepped back, letting the darkness take me in again. When I finally walked to my car, the world felt different, sharper, heavier, waiting. I sat there in the driver's seat with my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Thinking of my aunt's voice. Thinking of the years my parents treated me like a spare part in their machine. Thinking of that casserole dish I had to return tonight, the one they'd assume I needed because I was struggling again. The truth pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat trying to escape. They had no idea who I was about to become. And for the first time in years, I didn't correct the universe. I let the silence stay, I let it grow. I let it protect me. When I finally started the engine, the headlights caught the rain beginning to fall, thin, silver, gentle at first. The kind of rain that promises a storm. I drove toward my parents' house anyway. And when I turned onto their street, I swear the night itself leaned forward, watching. By the time I turned onto my parents' street, the rain had thickened into a slow, steady curtain, the kind that softens the edges of houses and street signs and makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. Their porch light stood out like a small, stubborn star, flickering in the wind, casting a thin glow across the driveway where I used to ride my bike before I understood what silence in a family could do to a child. I pulled in carefully, the tires crunching across gravel that hadn't been replaced since I was 17. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary, as if the leather could anchor me, steady me, remind me that I wasn't coming here as the version of myself they thought they still owned. The casserole dish sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in a faded kitchen towel my mother had handed me 2 days ago with the casual dismissal of someone giving away something disposable. "Bring it back clean," she had said. "Last time you left it soaking for days." That wasn't true, of course. I had returned it the same night. But truth bends easily in this house, it always has, and sometimes I think they forget I remember things, or maybe they count on it. I grabbed the dish and stepped into the rain, feeling the cold hit my cheeks like tiny, sharp reminders that I was alive, that things were shifting whether I wanted them to or not. The porch steps creaked under my weight, the same 3 notes they've sung my whole life. I paused at the door, listening. Laughter spilled from inside, warm, overflowing, careless. The kind of laughter people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're happy. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to breathe past the knot tightening beneath my ribs. Even now, even after everything I'd learned, some part of me still wanted to be welcomed in without suspicion. I knocked lightly out of habit more than necessity. The door swung open almost immediately, as if someone had been waiting behind it. My mother stood there, wearing an apron dusted with flour, her smile just a shade too bright to be real. "Well, look who finally made it," she said, not angry, not warm, just that familiar neutral tone that could flip into judgment at any moment. I stepped inside and felt the heat of the house wash over me, thick with the smell of baked peaches and something slightly burnt. She took one look at the casserole dish and shook her head. "You didn't have to come out in the rain for that. We're all fine here, you know." I didn't answer, not yet. I just set the dish on the kitchen counter and unwrapped the towel carefully, aware of her watching me as if waiting for me to make a mistake she could catalogue later. The kitchen looked the same, beige tiles, family photos from years where I barely appear, a fridge covered in magnets from places I was never invited to go. My father sat at the dining table with a beer in hand, talking loudly to my Aunt Denise, laughing at something I hadn't heard. His shoulders stiffened when he noticed me, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "Hey kiddo," he said, using the nickname he saved for when people were around. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. Everything okay?" There it was, the soft jab, wrapped in pretend concern. He always made it sound like my existence was a surprise he wasn't prepared for. "Everything's fine," I said, hanging the towel over the back of a chair. My voice stayed level, steady, years of practice. My mother wiped her hands on her apron, leaning against the counter. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "We were starting to wonder if you were, struggling again." She lowered her voice on the last phrase, as if it were a confession she'd stolen from me, as if she hadn't been the one who taught me to fold myself small enough to disappear. The room felt warmer than before, almost too warm, like the walls were inching closer. I took a slow breath, watching steam rise from the pie cooling on the table. "I've been busy," I said, keeping my tone light. "Just a lot going on." My father raised an eyebrow. "Busy with what?" A simple question, an obvious trap. Before I could answer, my Aunt Denise chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Probably dating someone new. She always hides when she's dating someone, you know how she is. They all laughed softly, the kind of laugh that fills the air with tiny cuts. I forced a small smile, the same one I've worn since childhood, the mask that says you're right. You always are. It was easier than correcting them. Easier than explaining that the reason I disappeared was because I was learning the price of their love. I moved toward the sink, pretending to rinse something even though my hands were empty. The faucet hissed as the water ran, and for a moment the room blurred behind the mist rising from the stream. I heard them talking about bills, about a cousin needing money again, about how some people just can't handle responsibility. The irony nearly made me laugh. Then I heard it, my father's voice, low, meant for my mother alone but loud enough to reach me. She probably wants something. She only comes around when she needs help. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were new, they weren't, but because now, with the weight of my inheritance pressing gently against my ribs, they sounded almost funny. Almost. I shut off the water, letting the silence stretch. I didn't turn around, I didn't correct him. I didn't tell them about the keys sitting in my pocket, the keys to a house they didn't know I owned, to a future they couldn't manipulate. I just breathed slowly, letting their assumptions settle like dust on a shelf I no longer planned to maintain. My mother placed a warm hand on my shoulder. You know you can always ask us for anything, she said. We're family. Her touch felt light, her words felt heavy. I nodded, turning just enough to meet her eyes. I know, I said softly. And for the first time, the lie didn't sting. I picked up the now empty casserole dish, held it with both hands and stepped back toward the door before anyone could ask me to stay. Rain pounded softly against the windows. The house hummed with a warmth I no longer needed. My father didn't look up as I left. Outside, the air smelled like wet concrete and something clean, something new. I stood there on the porch for a moment, letting the rain touch my hair, my cheeks, my collarbone, washing off the stale kitchen heat. And as I walked toward my car, I realized I felt lighter. Not free yet, but close enough to taste it. The Victorian house stood at the end of a long gravel road, half hidden behind oak trees that bent toward each other like old women whispering secrets. I hadn't been here since I was 8, too young to understand why my aunt moved so far from the rest of the family, too obedient to ask why we only ever visited once. All I remembered was the smell of lavender tea and the soft weight of her hand on my shoulder as she guided me through rooms filled with sunlit dust. And now here I was again, grown but trembling, holding a set of keys that felt heavier than metal should. The afternoon light was fading when I approached the porch, painting the sky in shades of bruised blue and gold. The boards creaked beneath my feet, announcing me to a house that had been empty for years. When I pushed the key into the lock, it resisted for a moment, as if the house were thinking, "Are you sure?" But then it clicked open with a soft sigh that felt like a welcome. The air inside smelled of cedar and thyme. Not stale, just paused. The kind of air that waits for footsteps to stir it back to life. I stepped slowly, letting my fingers trail along the wall, feeling the grooves in the old floral wallpaper. Light slipped through the stained glass windows in soft colors, amber, rose, a deep green that moved like forest light across the floorboards. It was beautiful in the way forgotten places are beautiful, quietly, stubbornly, without apology. I set my bag down on the entry table and listened. Houses have a sound when they belong to you, this low hum that sits just below silence, like a voice you haven't heard speak yet but somehow recognize. My heart tightened a little. I whispered, "I'm here," even though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Maybe my aunt, maybe myself. I moved room to room slowly, like I was walking through a memory instead of a house. The living room held a piano I didn't remember, its keys covered in a thin layer of dust. I tapped one lightly and the note rang out, soft, hesitant but still alive. Across from it hung a framed map of Georgia, marked with tiny red pins. I made a mental note to come back to it. The dining room was darker, shadows lingering in the corners. A long table sat beneath a chandelier that looked delicate enough to fracture under a whisper. The chairs were still arranged neatly, as if my aunt had stepped out only a moment ago. I lifted one slightly, solid oak, heavier than it looked. Everything she owned was like that, sturdy, intentional. Then I found the study. The door was half open, and a streak of late sunlight cut across the floor, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the quiet. I pushed the door open and froze. Papers were stacked in neat piles across the desk. An old banker's lamp glowed green when I switched it on, casting an emerald wash across the room. The air felt different in here, charged, almost trembling, as if the walls remembered voices. I sat in her old leather chair, the seat molding to me with a soft creak. My hands hovered over the papers without touching them. The top stack contained financial documents, investment accounts, property deeds, legal letters written in that stiff, polite tone that tries to hide meaning. I took a breath and began reading. The numbers didn't shock me, not exactly. What shook me was the intention. Every account was organized meticulously. Every property had clear notes. And at the bottom of each folder, handwritten in her precise cursive, were reminders for Ariana, for her future, for her protection. Something warm broke against the back of my throat. My mother always said my aunt spoiled me, but this wasn't spoiling. This was planning. This was legacy. This was love shaped into action. My aunt had been preparing for this long before I understood I needed protecting. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting that truth settle into my bones. A soft rumble of thunder rolled outside, deep and distant. Rain tapped at the window in slow, deliberate beats. I felt like the world was sinking itself to my breath. When I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, I found a wooden box. Smooth, dark, polished, my aunt's initials etched on top. Inside were photographs, some of her, some of my grandmother, some of a little girl I recognized as myself at age 5. I looked strangely serious in that picture, holding a small stuffed rabbit by one ear. My aunt's handwriting covered the back. She sees everything. A small tremor ran down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was pride or sadness. In another drawer I found letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me though they had never been mailed, some dated years back, some recent. I hesitated before opening one, my thumb tracing the edge of the envelope. The first letter was short. Ari, I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you choices. Take your time, trust your instinct, you'll know what to do before anyone else understands what's happening. I closed the letter gently, pressing it to my chest. Her voice filled the room so clearly I almost answered her out loud. Thunder cracked again, louder this time, rattling the window. The storm had arrived in full, sheets of rain sliding down the glass. The colors from the stained glass windows shifted across the floor like moving water. The whole house felt alive. I stood and crossed to the staircase, my footsteps echoing softly. The second floor smelled like lavender and old paper. When I reached the last door at the end of the hallway, her bedroom, I paused with my hand on the knob, a breath in, a breath out. The room was tidy, untouched. A quilt lay neatly across the bed, stitched in soft blues and creams. A single book rested on the nightstand, its pages marked with a thin ribbon. I walked over and lifted it gently. It was a journal. Her handwriting filled the first page. If you're reading this, Ari, then the time has come. My throat tightened again. This wasn't just a house. It was a map, a key, a warning, a gift. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening as rain hammered the roof and wind brushed the siding like fingertips. I felt the weight of my inheritance settle, not as burden but as responsibility, as truth. Everything my aunt left me had a purpose. And tonight, in the glow of lamplight and storm shadows, I realized something I'd never dared to think. My family had underestimated the wrong woman. They always had. And now I finally had the evidence, the tools, and the strength to do something about it. I think the hardest part of growing up in a house like mine is realizing that silence has a shape. Not just a sound, a whole weight. A whole architecture. Most people think silence is empty. Not in my family. Our silence was a weapon, a warning, a room you got locked inside and told to stop being dramatic while the door clicked shut from the outside. I learned early how to read it. The long, stretched-out quiet that meant someone was lying. The clipped, hostile quiet that meant someone was angry but pretending they were. And the worst one, the soft, syrupy quiet my mother used to write before she asked me to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. When I was little, I used to think they treated me like the responsible one because they trusted me. Now I know it's because I was easy. Predictable. The child who wouldn't push back. The daughter who did the emotional heavy lifting so everyone else could keep pretending they were strong. But here's the thing about being the responsible one. You grow up learning how to carry weight that was never meant for a single person. You grow up strong, sure. But you also grow up bent. I remember sitting in that living room with my hands in my lap, feeling like a peace offering at a table full of people who didn't know how to speak peace. I could tell exactly how the night would go. The side comments, the little barbs wrapped in compliments. The "well, you know how your sister is," said with a tone that made me complicit in her flaws. And it wasn't even that they hated me. They didn't. They loved me just conveniently. They loved me the way you love the person who shows up early to help set up the event and stays late to clean, but never gets tagged in the photos. Their love was functional. Transactional. They loved what I did, not who I was. I think that's why I talk to the camera like this. Because it's the first time I've ever been allowed to tell the story from my side. No interruptions. No corrections. No, that's not how it happened, even though yes, it is how it happened. It happened to me. And the truth is, that night wasn't even the worst one. It wasn't the loudest or the cruelest. It was just the first one where I realized, as an adult, that I didn't belong there anymore. Not because I was different, but because they needed me to stay the same. And I wasn't willing to do that. Not this time. Not after what I'd found out. Not after the message that started everything. I keep thinking about that text, the one that pulled me back home like gravity with teeth. Just 6 words. 6 words that turned my whole life sideways. We need you, something is wrong. I stared at those 6 words on my screen, so long the letters started to blur. Not because I didn't understand them, I understood them too well. My family never reached out unless something was broken. And usually that something was me. But this time the message came from my aunt. The one person in the entire family who never asked me for anything. The one who used to slip me extra dessert and whisper, "You don't always have to be the strong one, baby," even though I never believed her. So when she said something was wrong, I knew it wasn't another emotional chore disguised as concern. It wasn't a request for me to fix my sister's drama or soothe my mother's ego. No, this was different. Sharp, urgent. Like a pressure change in a room right before a storm hits. I didn't answer the message right away. Instead, I just sat there in the quiet, listening to the old hum of my apartment. The refrigerator clicking. The pipes settling. The neighbor's kid running back and forth overhead. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, and for a moment I wanted to cling to them like a lifeline. Because I knew what stepping back into that house would do to me. Silence has a shape, yes, but homes do too. And my childhood home was built like a labyrinth, every hallway a loop back into old versions of myself. The obedient ones. The scapegoat. The girl who took blame like it was communion. Who carried secrets that weren't hers and pain she didn't earn. I didn't want to be her again. I didn't want to walk inside and feel myself shrink. But something in me knew I wouldn't have a choice. Not this time. My aunt never asked for me unless she had to. She was the only person who ever told me to leave that house, to save myself. So if she was calling me back, then whatever was happening was bigger than the usual dysfunction. Bigger than the sharp-tongued arguments. Bigger than the invisible wars my family pretended weren't happening even as they bled from them. I finally typed out a single word, "okay." Then I deleted it. Then typed it again. Then deleted it again. It felt too small. Too simple. Too accepting of a responsibility I didn't even understand yet. But eventually I hit send. Not because I wanted to go. Because guilt is a leash, and mine has always been short. I put my phone face down on the table and looked at the wall across from me, at the framed print I'd bought last year. A simple sketch of a woman standing alone at the edge of a cliff. Everyone thinks it's about solitude. It's not. It's about thresholds. About the moment before everything changes. I didn't know what waited for me in that house. I didn't know whose voice would be raised, or whose tears would be weaponized first. I didn't know why my aunt sounded afraid in her message. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something was wrong. And for once, it wasn't me. I drove to my aunt's place just past sunset, when the sky looked like bruised skin, purple fading into a dull, aching blue. The kind of sky that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I rolled down the window halfway just to feel the air, warm and restless, brushing against my face like it recognized me. Like it had missed me. I hadn't been back to that neighborhood in years, not since I told myself I was done collecting emotional debts from people who never planned on paying me back. But here I was, turning onto the street where I learned to keep my voice soft and my thoughts sharp. Her house sat at the end of the block, tucked beneath a massive oak that had been growing longer than any of our family grudges. The porch light was on a small, trembling cone of gold, but the windows were dark, like the house was listening instead of watching. I parked across the street and just sat there a moment, hands still on the wheel, letting the quiet press into me. There's a kind of silence that feels like an invitation. And there's the other kind, the kind that feels like a warning. This one felt like both. I walked up the cracked path, and even though I tried not to, I felt myself slipping back into old rhythms. Shoulders down, footsteps light, breath shallow. That house trained me to move like a ghost, and apparently ghosts never forget how to haunt. My aunt opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been standing there the whole time, hand on the knob, waiting for the exact beat my shadow crossed her porch. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit, somehow folded. Her eyes were tired in a way that made it hard to meet them without feeling something heavy settle in my chest. "You came," she whispered, like she didn't believe it until she saw me. "I got your message," I said. My voice was steady, but the moment I stepped inside, the air shifted around me, thick, stale, almost humid with old grief. Houses hold feelings like attics hold dust. You don't see it, but you taste it. Living room lights dim. Curtains half drawn. A faint smell of lavender struggling to cover something older, something earthy, metallic, like the ghost of rain on concrete. My aunt motioned for me to sit, but she stayed standing, arms crossed over herself like she couldn't find a place to put her own hands. "It's about your parents," she said. Of course it was, it always is. My stomach tensed, but I didn't interrupt. I've had a lifetime of practice listening to painful things quietly. "They came to my door last week," she continued, "together." That word hit harder than she meant it to. My parents hadn't shown up together for me in over 15 years, not for graduations, not for birthdays. Not even when I moved out at 17, with everything I owned in 2 trash bags. My parents only united when they had an agenda, or a target. What did they want? I asked, though the answer was already flickering at the edges of my mind. My aunt walked closer, lowered her voice like the walls might report us. "They asked about you." A pulse of old heat rose inside me, fear mixed with something sharper, something like the early shimmer of anger. "Why now?" I asked. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me the truth before she said a word. "They think I'm dying." My breath caught sharp enough to sting. "And they think," she whispered, "that I left everything to you." The room went silent except for the soft tick of her old clock, every second landing like a footstep approaching. I felt a chill slide along my spine, slow and deliberate. Not because of the inheritance. Not because of the money. Not even because my parents were circling her like vultures in daylight. No, what frightened me was the clarity of the moment. The way everything suddenly aligned like a constellation I hadn't been able to see before. My parents hadn't come back for me. They had come back because of me. Because for the first time in my life I was worth something to them. My aunt reached for my hand, hers trembling, mine cold. "They won't stop," she said, "not until they get what they think they're owed." A slow, steady breath rose in my chest, and I felt something shift, a familiar ache, yes, but wrapped now in a new kind of resolve. A quiet steel settling into place. I met her eyes. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the girl who survived that house. I felt like the woman who might finally burn it down. The room dimmed as the porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. A soft cliffhanger of a thought whispered through me. If my parents wanted a war, they had no idea who I'd become. The night I went back to my apartment, the air felt heavier than when I'd left it, as if I'd carried some of my aunt's fear home with me. The hallway lights in my building flickered in their usual tired rhythm, but even that felt different, like the walls were paying attention for the first time. I shut the door behind me, slid the deadbolt into place, and leaned against the wood just long enough to feel the tremor in my hands finally settle. I wasn't scared of my parents. That stopped years ago. What I feared was the version of myself they could still awaken, the girl who apologized before anyone accused her, the one who believed love was something she earned through obedience. I'd buried that girl. But the past has a pulse, faint but stubborn, and seeing my aunt like that, it started beating again. I dropped my keys on the table and walked into the kitchen, needing water, needing something clean and cold. But as soon as I turned on the faucet, my phone buzzed, one vibration, then another, like someone pounding on a distant door. Unknown number. I didn't need to open it to know who it was. Still, curiosity can be a quiet poison. And tonight it won. The message preview flashed across the top of the screen. We need to talk. No greeting. No name. No apology. I opened it anyway. Your aunt is telling lies. We deserve to know what's going on before she turns you against us. Call me. My heartbeat didn't speed up, it slowed. That's what my body does when danger walks in. Everything goes still, clear like a lake freezing over. I scrolled down and saw another message sent a minute later. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder for who? Them or me? Silence pressed into my apartment, thick enough to taste. I turned off the faucet, set the glass down, and stared at the reflection of my own face in the dark kitchen window, faint, ghost-like, almost unfamiliar. There's a moment in every woman's life when she has to decide who she's going to be when the people who raised her come knocking with old expectations. I could feel mine approaching like slow thunder. I typed nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something. Responding makes it a conversation. Silence makes it a boundary. I put my phone face down and walked to the living room, sinking onto the couch. My mind kept replaying my aunt's words. They won't stop. The worst part wasn't her saying it. It was that she said it with the kind of certainty only someone who's seen darkness up close can carry. My parents had always treated me like a resource, emotional, financial, spiritual. Whatever they lacked, they took from me. And now that they thought my aunt had left me something significant. They wouldn't just come back. They'd come hungry. A low hum vibrated through the room, my doorbell. I froze. Once, then twice. Then a long, impatient press that sent a shiver up my spine. I moved carefully, quietly, the way I used to during the bad years, when footsteps meant blows you couldn't see coming. I leaned toward the peephole without making a sound. At first, I saw nothing. Then a figure shifted, tall, male, leaning casually against the frame like he belonged there. Not my father. Worse, my uncle's. The one who always thought I was too sensitive, who liked to remind me that loyalty meant obedience, that family had rules. He was smiling, not warmly, but with that smirk men get when they think they still have power over you. He knocked again, harder this time. Come on now, he said through the door, his voice muffled but recognizable. I know you're in there. We need to chat about your aunt, about all this confusion she's caused. Confusion. That was always their word for accountability. His shadow shifted closer. You're old enough now, he continued. No need to keep secrets from your own blood. Blood. If only that meant something. I stepped back from the door, heart steady, breathing slow, the lake inside me freezing over again. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I didn't give him the satisfaction of footsteps. A long silence followed before he exhaled sharply. So that's how it's gonna be. Another pause. Then the unmistakable scrape of something sliding under my door, paper. A folded letter. Or envelope. His footsteps retreated down the hall, but not fast enough. He wanted me to hear every step, to know he wasn't walking away in defeat. He wanted me to feel watched. When the hallway finally went quiet, I approached the door again. Slowly, carefully, the envelope lay on the floor, a clean white slash against the wood. My name was written on the front. Not my full name, just the first. Casual, familiar. Like family. Like threat. I picked it up with 2 fingers, almost expecting it to burn. Inside was a single sentence, written in my father's handwriting. We will get what belongs to us. I stood there, letter trembling slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the clarity settling into me like cold air filling my lungs. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a family drama. This was a claim. A warning. A declaration of war. And they had no idea that I was ready for one. The night closed in, thick and watchful. Somewhere in the apartment building, a door slammed, the sound echoing like the end of something soft, and the start of something sharp. A quiet cliffhanger hung in the air. If they wanted a fight over what they thought they were owed, they were about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. I barely slept that night, not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the sound of my uncle's voice through the door, that slow, paternal tone men use when they think they're still in charge of you. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that envelope sliding across my floor like a quiet intrusion, a promise dressed as a threat. By the time morning came, I felt wrung out, like someone had squeezed every hour of rest out of my bones. The sun crept through my curtains in thin, pale ribbons, soft light, hesitant, like it wasn't sure it belonged in this apartment anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the letter again, rereading those words until they stopped stinging and started feeling like motivation. We will get what belongs to us. It was the kind of sentence meant to make a woman like me fold. Instead, it made something straighten inside me, something I didn't even know had bent. I showered, dressed, tied my hair back in a low knot, movements calm, precise. Then I grabbed my keys and left the apartment as if I had somewhere urgent to be. I didn't. But they didn't need to know that. The air outside was cool, clearer than usual, carrying that faint metallic scent that always appears before a storm. I welcomed it. Storms cleanse, storms reveal. Storms wash away the things that pretend to be solid. I drove without thinking, muscle memory guiding me through old neighborhoods I'd tried to forget. Each turn was a reminder that even when you escape a place, it still knows your name. I ended up parked outside a small cafe near my aunt's house, the one she used to take me to when I was a teenager and needed a breather from home. Back then I always ordered hot chocolate, extra whipped cream. Today I ordered black coffee, no sugar. Growth has a taste. I took a seat by the window, phone pressed flat against the table, waiting for the next move. People like my parents didn't like silence, they liked control. And the moment they felt it slipping, they'd reach, grab, manipulate, twist. Sure enough, 10 minutes later my phone buzzed. Not a text this time. A call. I didn't answer. Let it ring out. Watched the screen go dark. 2 minutes later it rang again. Same number. This time I picked up, but I didn't speak. I let the static of the line fill the air between us like fog. My mother's voice cracked through it first, brittle and sharp. I don't appreciate being ignored. There it was. No greeting. No concern. Just irritation that her usual power wasn't working. I stayed silent. She tried again, voice trembling now, not with fear but with anger. Your aunt is sick, she's confused. She's saying things that put this whole family at risk. You should have come to us first. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me like cold water. Years ago, that tone would have gutted me. Today it barely grazed. I finally spoke, voice low, measured, steady. What are you afraid she's telling me? A pause. Heavy. Telling. Then my father's voice cut in, low, rehearsed, strangely calm. We want to make sure everything is handled correctly when the time comes. You're involved now. We don't want misunderstandings. My hand tightened around my coffee cup. Misunderstandings like you showing up at her house uninvited? I asked. Another pause, shorter this time, meaner. We're her closest family, he said. We deserve to know what she's planning. There it was, not even dressed up this time. Is that why you sent my uncle to my apartment? I asked, each word clipped clean. Silence. Long and cold. Then my mother inhaled sharply, that sound she made when a lie was forming. We don't know what you're talking about. Of course. I leaned back, letting my chair creak beneath me, letting the tension settle into the space between us like a closing door. You do, I said softly, and I'm done pretending otherwise. A simmering heat filled the line, that familiar cocktail of guilt and fury they always fell back on when I didn't fall into place. But I didn't give them time to find their footing. I ended the calls. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just ended it. The quiet after felt strange, not relief, not fear. Something steadier. Something like a shift in gravity. I finished my coffee, watching condensation wander down the glass like a slow tear. Then I stood, left a tip beside the cup and walked out into the brightening morning. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up, warm, insistent, carrying the first scent of coming rain. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. But not from my parents. From my aunt. I need you to come back today. There's something you have to see before they get to it. A shiver moved through me, not fear but anticipation. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one running from it. I drove back to my aunt's house with the kind of focus people mistake for calm. Hands steady on the wheel, breath low, eyes fixed forward. Inside, though, something restless moved through me like a current, not fear, not exactly, but the awareness that whatever waited for me would shift the ground I'd been standing on. The sky had darkened since morning. Clouds thickened overhead, bruised and heavy, pressing low enough to feel like a warning. My aunt's street looked different under that sky, quieter, stripped of colour, like the world was holding its breath for me. I parked in the same spot as before, cut the engine, and for a long moment just watched her house. The porch light was off this time. That alone told me something was wrong. I walked up the path slowly, listening to the soft crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. No voices inside, no movement. The curtains were still drawn, but the house felt awake, alert in a way that made the air thicken. I knocked once. My aunt opened the door almost immediately, like she'd been standing there again, waiting. Her eyes were wide, her breath slightly uneven, like she'd been packing or arguing with someone who wasn't there. You came, she said, voice low, almost relieved. What's going on? I asked. She didn't answer, just stepped aside and let me in. Inside, the living room looked the same, dim, the old clock ticking, the soft scent of lavender fighting with something older, deeper. But there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there last time, a kind of static that made my skin prickle. My aunt shut the door, locked it, then locked the second lock beneath it. A habit she didn't used to have. Sit, she said, motioning toward the couch. I obeyed, not because I was the obedient girl anymore, but because I needed her to feel like she still had some control. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, folding her hands tightly in her lap. I didn't call you back here for emotion, she said. Or fear, or guilt. I called you because you need the truth before they twist it. A slow exhale escaped her, as if she'd been holding the next sentence in her chest for years. I made my will 8 years ago, long before I got sick, long before your parents started sniffing around like hounds in heat, and what I left behind, it isn't small. I swallowed, throat suddenly dry. You don't have to explain anything. I do, she cut in sharply. Because they'll try to make you doubt, they'll try to make you feel unworthy, they'll try to make you believe you took something from them, and you need to know why I did what I did. Her eyes glistened, not with frailty but fierce clarity. I left everything to you, because you are the only one in this family who never took from me. The words hit hard enough to knock something loose inside my chest. She shook her head slowly, as if dismissing ghosts. I trusted your mother once, she continued. Deeply, I thought blood meant loyalty. But she has a hunger in her, a softness for manipulation, your father too. They drain the people around them and call it family. She leaned back, breathing shallow. You survived them. That alone tells me you know how to carry legacy without letting it rot. I stared at her, feeling heat rise behind my ribs, grief, gratitude, anger, something sharp and tangled. What is it they're after? I asked softly. What is it you left for me? She didn't answer right away. She stood instead, slow but steady, and motioned for me to follow. I rose and walked behind her down the hallway I used to tiptoe through as a teenager, past the photos of relatives who didn't deserve their frames. She stopped at the door to her bedroom. Inside, the air was different, cooler, almost thick with something unspoken. The blinds were half closed, casting soft shadows across the room like quiet stripes. She walked to the far wall where an old dresser sat. Then she did something I didn't expect. She placed her hand flat against the wall beside the dresser. And pushed. A soft click echoed through the room. A small, narrow panel loosened, revealing a hidden space carved into the wall. My breath stilled. "Your parents don't know about this," she whispered. Inside the compartment was a stack of envelopes, a small metal lockbox, and a single leather-bound notebook worn smooth at the edges. My aunt lifted the notebook first and placed it gently into my hands. The leather was warm, aged, almost tender with use. "This," she said, "is everything." I opened it to the first page. My aunt's handwriting, neat, deliberate, strong, filled the lines. Dates, names, transactions. Notes about the family. Notes about my parents. Notes about me. I felt the tendons in my wrist tense. She put a hand on my shoulder. "There are things I saw," she said softly. "Things I protected you from, things they think time has erased." Her voice cracked. "But I wrote it all down." I flipped further. Every page held truth, layered, quiet, damning. Not just money. Not just inheritance. Secrets. Patterns. Evidence. A history of manipulation that stretched back decades. My aunt watched me, eyes steady. "They will come for this," she said, "and they will try every trick they know, but you," her voice softened to something almost like pride, "you have strength they never learned to fear." A clap of thunder rolled through the sky outside, deep enough to rattle the windowpane. I closed the notebook, holding it tight against my chest, feeling its weight, emotional, generational, dangerous. My aunt walked back toward the hall but paused in the doorway. "Once you open that lockbox," she added, "there's no going back." I turned toward it slowly, the storm outside casting a flicker of white light across the metal lid. A quiet cliffhanger settled in the air like dust. Whatever was inside that box was the reason my parents had come crawling back into my life. And I wasn't sure if opening it would save me or ruin us all. The lockbox sat on the small carpeted floor like a dark promise. Its metal surface reflected the pale light spilling from the window, dull and cold. My fingers hovered over it, tracing the edges without touching the clasp, as if proximity alone might teach me its secrets. I could hear my aunt behind me, quiet, watching, breathing with the rhythm of someone waiting for the inevitable. I took a slow breath, letting the tension settle in my shoulders. Opening this box wasn't just about curiosity. It was about inheritance, about power, about understanding the invisible chains my parents had spent my entire life trying to fasten around me. I lifted the lid. Inside was exactly what I feared and exactly what I needed. Stacks of ledgers, documents, and envelopes filled with notes in my aunt's careful handwriting. Every account, every property, every transaction meticulously tracked over the years. And then there was the notebook, smaller, leather-bound, worn at the edges, that seemed to pulse with quiet significance. I pulled it out and opened it. The first page listed names, my parents, extended family, business contacts, even a few long-forgotten acquaintances. Next to each name, a series of notes, dates, amounts, and subtle observations about character and behavior. Some notes read like warnings, others judgments, some almost confessions. She had been writing for years, cataloguing the family like a historian of betrayal. A thin envelope rested atop the pile. I slid my fingers under it carefully and unfolded it. It contained a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. My aunt's familiar handwriting filled the page. "Ari, this is what I could never tell you out loud. Your parents, they are not what you believe. They will come for everything if you let them. Trust your instincts and know that you are the only one who can carry this forward." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in my chest like stone. My mind raced, tracing back the years of absence, the hollow smiles, the demands disguised as love. Everything aligned now, the timing, the messages, the visit, the envelope at my door. They hadn't come for her health, they had come for me, for what she had left behind. I closed the envelope and lifted a ledger. The numbers leapt off the page, not just money, accounts, property deeds, investments. My aunt had left me an empire, carefully disguised as an inheritance. And hidden within, the threads of evidence, meticulously recorded, exposing the greed and manipulation of those who had abandoned me when I was just a child. A slow shiver moved through me. Power has a weight you feel in your bones, not in your hands. It is both thrilling and terrifying. I realized then that my life would never be ordinary again. Not because of what I owned, but because now, for the first time, I could hold the people who had tried to break me accountable. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the glass lightly. Rain began tapping against the windows, rhythmic and insistent. I looked down at the ledger, then the notebook, then the envelope. The house seemed to lean closer, as if listening to my decision. I had a choice. I could confront my parents now, risk exposure and conflict, or I could wait, plan, and turn their own tactics against them. Patience had always been my secret weapon, the quiet skill I had honed for years. And for the first time, it felt like it could serve me in more than just survival. My aunt's voice broke my thoughts. Ari, remember, knowledge without action is still powerless. The moment to act will come soon, but you must understand the landscape first. I nodded. I could feel her trust pressing on me, warm and heavy. The storm outside grew louder, and I knew the calm before the confrontation would be fleeting. The next moves would define everything, my freedom, my family, and the future I was now fully responsible for. I set the notebook and ledger carefully back into the lockbox and closed it. The click of the latch sounded louder than expected, final. And in that sound, I felt a small, dangerous thrill, the sound of a door closing on the past and another opening toward power, clarity, and retribution. The rain fell harder, drumming against the roof like the heartbeat of the night. And I realized with startling precision that the real storm was not outside the walls of my aunt's house. It was inside me. A quiet cliffhanger rested on my shoulders. The knowledge I now hold could save me, or it could ignite a war I might not survive. And I had a feeling my parents were already making their first move. I didn't sleep again that night, though exhaustion tugged at me like a tide. The house felt alive in the dark, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the eaves carrying messages I couldn't quite decipher. I sat cross-legged on the rug in front of the living room fireplace, the lockbox at my side, my aunt's notebook open in my lap. The rain tapped relentlessly against the windows, a soft percussion that matched the rhythm of my thoughts, fast, uneven, insistent. I started reading the entries from the oldest pages first, tracing back the history of the family with a meticulous curiosity I hadn't allowed myself before. Betrayal had a pattern, I realized, like a disease passed down through generations. The ledger wasn't just numbers, it was a map of intentions, habits, weaknesses, and greed, names repeated, debts remembered, favors owed and forgotten. And then, inevitably, there were my parents. Every manipulation, every lie, every instance where they treated me as a tool rather than a child. I felt the heat in my chest, a quiet rage that coiled in my stomach. I wasn't the girl who stayed silent anymore. I wasn't the one who took blame for things I didn't do. The fire my aunt had nurtured in me, the trust in my own instincts, the patience, the strategy, flared up. This wasn't just inheritance. This was armor, this was a weapon, and I was ready. A soft knock echoed from the hallway. I froze, heart tightening, expecting my parents or their emissary to appear. But it was only my aunt, holding a tray with 2 cups of tea, steam curling between us like smoke signals. She set it down without a word, then leaned against the doorframe. "I didn't tell them," she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper, "that you were here tonight. Not yet. They think you're distracted at your apartment. That buys us time." Time, I let the words settle. Everything depended on time, strategy, patience. They had underestimated me all my life, but not anymore. I sipped the tea slowly, letting its warmth spread, letting the bitter taste ground me. My aunt watched me for a long moment, then gestured toward the wall where the hidden compartment sat. "Everything you need is in there," she said, "but there's one more thing." Her tone hardened. "Something I never put in writing, something they don't know." I looked at her, pulse quickening. She reached behind the compartment and pulled out a thin folder, marked with my initials. Inside were photographs, documents, and letters that even the ledgers hadn't revealed. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Proof of deception, betrayal, and schemes my parents had executed over decades. My stomach tightened. I realized then that the family tree was full of shadows, of hidden agendas and silent wars waged behind closed doors. But these shadows were about to meet light, my light. I felt a strange clarity, a sensation I hadn't experienced since discovering the first letter from my aunt, knowledge merging with purpose, fear tempered by resolve. I was ready to move, to strike, to reclaim what had been denied me not just by my parents, but by a history of exploitation and silence. Thunder rolled again, louder this time, rattling the windows like a signal. I glanced at my aunt. She nodded, as if confirming what I already knew. "Tomorrow," she said, "you start. They're already in motion and you need to be ready." I closed the folder and the notebook, placing them gently back in the lockbox. The storm outside pressed harder, rain lashing against the glass, wind rattling the shutters. But inside me, a different storm had risen, one quiet, patient, deadly in its precision. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. Not my parents, not the rest of the family, not the history that had tried to shape me. I was the storm now. And when they came, they would realize too late that the woman they underestimated their whole lives had been quietly preparing for this moment. A cliffhanger whispered through the walls. The first move had been made by them, and I had hours to decide how to turn it against them before the board was set, the pieces in motion, and the game irreversible. The next morning dawned grey and low, like a sky too heavy to bother with sunlight. I drove back to my aunt's house, the road slick with leftover rain, the air smelling of wet asphalt and impending confrontation. My mind replayed the previous night's discoveries, every name, every note, every photograph from the lockbox cycling through my thoughts like a silent film I had no control over. My pulse was steady, but my senses were sharp, the kind of alertness that comes when you know someone else is moving against you and the moment to act is approaching. Inside the house, my aunt was already awake, moving quietly in the kitchen. Her presence was calm but taut, the kind of energy that hints at knowledge too heavy to share lightly. She handed me a cup of coffee without looking up, then finally said, "They've already made their first move." I didn't respond, I didn't need to. My hands tightened around the cup, warm liquid burning against my palms, steadying me. "They sent your uncle again," she continued. "He was seen asking around the neighborhood, trying to find where you keep your apartment, who you're in contact with. It's subtle, the kind of thing that feels casual until you realize every look, every question is calculated." My chest constricted, not fear, not exactly. Something older, sharper, anticipation. The first move had been made and now the game was real. I set the cup down slowly, letting the quiet absorb the tension between us. "Then it's time I start responding," I said, voice calm, deliberate, not with anger, with precision. She nodded. "Good, you've always been patient. That patience will save you more than force ever could." We moved into the study together. The lockbox sat on the desk, the notebooks and ledgers arranged in a line like soldiers ready for inspection. I opened it, reviewing the notes again, patterns emerging now that the stakes were real. Every transaction, every property, every subtle note about my parents' behaviors, it all became a roadmap. Hours passed in meticulous planning. I cross-referenced the ledgers with the letters, marking connections, tracing inconsistencies, and noting where my parents had left themselves vulnerable. My aunt occasionally pointed out details I would have missed, her voice low, steady, almost conspiratorial. "They're predictable," she said. "Always have been." By afternoon, the rain had stopped. The air smelled sharp and new, washed clean by the storm. I stepped onto the porch, phone in hand, ready to set my first move in motion. I texted a contact my aunt had suggested, a legal ally. Discreet, sharp-minded, someone who understood how to use knowledge as leverage. Within minutes, a response came, confirming a meeting later that day. This was the first thread in a plan that would unravel the years of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. As I watched the street outside, empty and quiet, a thought struck me. My parents believed they were orchestrating events, controlling me, anticipating my weakness. They didn't understand one crucial thing. I had grown up watching their moves for years. I had learned patience, strategy, and observation. I had learned to anticipate manipulation. And now I was prepared to meet it with precision. A subtle tension hummed in the air. The first move had been made by them, yes, but I had already plotted my response, and it would be quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. The cliffhanger hung like a shadow across the room. By tonight, I would know exactly how far they were willing to go, and I would decide exactly how far I would let them push. The day had stretched long and taut, like a string pulled to its breaking point. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the air outside had taken on a violet hush, the kind that makes the world hold its breath. My aunt's house seemed smaller now, walls pressing closer, corridors narrowing as if the past and present were converging in that space. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder, every shadow sharper. I could feel it. Tonight was the night. I sat at the desk with the lockbox open before me. The notebooks, ledgers, photographs, and letters, the weight of years, secrets, and betrayals lay spread out in deliberate disarray. I traced each name, each transaction, each note with deliberate focus. By now, the plan was clear in my mind. I would not let anger dictate my actions. This was precision, strategy, justice. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. My aunt had already gone upstairs to rest. She trusted me now, trusted that the lessons she'd imparted had rooted deep. I walked toward the door cautiously, my pulse steady, my instincts sharp. Through the peephole I saw both of them, my mother and father, standing side by side, smiles too practiced, eyes too calculating. The very picture of a family returning only because they thought they were owed something. I opened the door, meeting their gaze evenly. I felt the cold clarity settle in my chest. I held the envelope they had left at my apartment weeks ago in one hand, the other gripping the notebook. I spoke calmly, deliberately. I know why you're here, I know what you want, and I know exactly what you've done to get it. My mother's smile faltered, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. My father's posture stiffened, his confidence shaking for the first time in years. I've read every note, every ledger, every transaction. I know the patterns of your greed, I know the lies you've built around yourselves, and I know the manipulation you've perfected as a craft. They blinked. I saw recognition flash in their eyes, the sudden understanding that the child they had dismissed, the daughter they thought was weak, had grown beyond them. I won't fight you with anger, I continued. I'll fight you with truth, with evidence, with patience. Everything you've hidden, everything you've taken, it's documented, and I will protect it. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came. My father's jaw tightened. I could see the storm behind their eyes, the calculation giving way to fear. I handed them the notebook, the ledgers, the envelope. You'll see, I said softly, that what belongs to me is not just inheritance. It's clarity, it's accountability, it's understanding, and it's proof that you cannot rewrite history. For the first time they were silent. The weight of their misdeeds pressed in on them in a way no argument, no plea, no manipulation could fix. They realized finally that I had been the one who held the power all along. Not wealth, not favor, not obedience. Knowledge, patience, strategy, emotional intelligence. I closed the door softly, leaving them standing there in the dim light of the porch. I walked back to the living room, the rain outside having stopped, the air washed clean. I set the lockbox back in its hidden compartment, closing it slowly, deliberately. A soft click, final. I felt a release in my chest, a quiet satisfaction not rooted in revenge but in justice. They had returned, believing they could claim what they wanted. Instead, they had discovered that I had never been theirs to control. I stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the night air. The world smelled of rain, of earth, of possibility. The house behind me stood silent and still, witness to the reckoning. I knew the path ahead would still require vigilance, but I felt light, steady, free in a way I had never known. For the first time in my life, I understood something essential. Family is defined not by blood, but by loyalty, integrity, and respect. Those who take without giving, who manipulate and betray, will never dictate your worth. And those who stay true to themselves, even in the face of greed and silence, will always find their legacy. I looked up at the sky, streaked with the first stars of the evening. A single gust of wind brushed my face, soft, insistent, like a reminder. The storm had passed. I had survived. I had triumphed not through force, not through anger, but through clarity, patience, and the quiet power of knowing my own worth. I smiled softly, turning back toward the house one last time. A chapter of shadows had closed. A chapter of light had begun. And in the silence that followed, I felt the kind of peace that only comes when you've finally reclaimed yourself.